G'day and thanks for joining us for another Australia Talks. I'm DK and I'm joined as always by my lovely co-host Ardeet. Today is Thursday, the 18th of June, 2026, and our topics this week are China. Their ability to hit Australia with missiles is real and growing. And the world's biggest whale graveyard has been found in the Indian Ocean off Australia. Of course, we've got our Two Ticks Town talk, and then we'll jump into This Week in Australian History, and we'll finish off, as always, with the 4X Bottle Top Trivia. But before we get into all of that, we need a favour from you. If you enjoy the show, the best thing you can do to help us out is share it with a friend. We'd be grateful for a review as well. This helps us grow the podcast and helps us keep making the show that you love. Now, enough of that. Let's catch up on the last week. Ardeet, hello. How has your week gone?
Hey, DK, it's been a pretty good week. Had some neighbours who we're good friends with up for a feed last night. We sort of have dinner at each other's place, swap it round about. So I had a French theme last night, had some French music going, made a French wine and mustard chicken in the slow cooker with some hot, very rich, buttery, creamy mash and a couple of other things, and then did creme brulee for my first time, which actually turned out pretty well.
Well done.
Yeah, I was happy with it. Custard was good, and the nice little sort of crispy top on top that I did with the little flamethrower chef's torch thing that I've got. So yeah, I was pretty happy with that. So it was a good night, and also I had printed out a 3D game on the 3D printer. It's basically noughts and crosses, but you've got two small pieces, two medium pieces, and two large pieces. They're just like a dome, and it's almost like a Russian nesting doll type of thing, in that you can cover someone else's piece. So, with noughts and crosses, it's always that thing, if you see a move and you think, okay, well, I can't win from here. But now with it, you can... with this one, you can sort of like, oh, hang on, I can cover their piece, and a change. It just has another dimension to it. It was a good fun sort of quick game. So they enjoyed that and was able to. So I printed them up a copy of it and dropped it off to them this morning. So that was the first. I've sort of been learning a little bit on the 3D. Printing, so it was sort of fun to actually get something that had appeal and give it away. So that was a bonus as well. And then this morning, got we had about 6 black wattles, which had come to their end of their life. And for the mates of the podcast, I'd shown DK a bit of video of the machine in operation, and this was. Just when I'd spoken to the bloke who does the tree removal and that, he said, "Oh, you're going to love this machine." He was obviously he's stoked in it, and when he brought it along, it didn't disappoint at all. It was on big. They looked almost like big tractor tires, but they also moved independently, which meant that he could sort of crab walk into a couple of spaces. It had very tight. Turning circles, and then it had this huge arm on it that could reach out, had a telescopic attachment, and it could grab the tree, and then it had a chainsaw built into it. So he grabbed the tree, cut it, and then he could just manipulate it down. The end bit had, I don't know how this works with the hydraulics, and I didn't quite get that, but the end bit seemed to have almost 360 degrees of movement, and then you could turn it down and just feed it straight into the mulcher at the back. So they got rid of 6 trees and did a stump grind on 5 of them, because I wanted one of the stumps left. And they turned up at 7:30 and were done by about 11:30, which to me was pretty impressive. So yeah, that was that was certainly fun to watch. I love seeing those big machines happening. So yes, that's been an eventful week, DK. How about you? What have you been up to?
Just saying that those machines, it is very, very impressive. I'd love to have a go at one of them.
Yeah,
I've never seen a heavy machinery operator sad, especially while they're working. They always seem like they're having a great time.
That's a funny comment.
Look, I'm sure there are, but yeah, they always seem to be having a good time. What have we been up to? We had a big bonfire on Saturday night, and it was a beautifully cool Queensland winter night. Unfortunately, it did rain on us, which was a little bit frustrating. It didn't bother the fire at all, but it just made all of us wet and all our chairs wet. But anyway, they dried quick enough in the fire. But it was really lovely, and it's one of those moments where I just love having a big bonfire. You know, just stand around a nice big fire, and especially when it's cold, and you can really appreciate it. So it's one of my favorite things about winter, is being able to sort of have a nice big fire and, you know, cuddle up around it and all of those sorts of things. I know a lot of our listeners are overseas, and particularly in the Northern Hemisphere. So, of course, it's winter for us. And so if you're not a summer person, you might be going, oh, stop teasing me, but it'll come back around again. But yeah, no, it's lovely to get out. We camped out as well, which was good until I realized that it was going to rain for the rest of the week. So my swags are still set up, all zipped up, basically just wet on the outside. Which is annoying because there's more rain coming over the next week. So they might be sitting there for, at this point, maybe 2 weeks. But I checked on them the other day. There's no water in them, so they'll be fine. There's probably
don't have space in the garage.
Not enough to like have them set up or at least like unrolled. You know, I don't want to pack them up wet because then you'll just get mold and stuff like that. So.
You may as well chuck them out if you're going to pack them up wet.
Exactly. So right now, I think the best course of action is just leave them where they are. They're going to get really seasoned, which is not a bad thing either. Where they just get wet and dry and just kind of. That process happens a few times, which I had seasoned. You need to season a swag when you buy a swag. And get like all the zippers wet and moisture into the stitching and all of that kind of stuff. So I've previously done that, which does help now. They're not leaking because I've done that work in the past. So, but I think
you have
this
to
is
get
probably
all those threads. Those threads essentially swell up and fill in those little holes because all those little holes add up.
Exactly. And if you don't, you'll get drips, and then you'll wake up wet in your swag, which is a horrible experience. Don't ask me how I know. All right, let's move on. China's ability to hit Australia with missiles is real and, unfortunately, growing. New analysis warns that China's military is developing a real and growing ability to hit the Australian mainland with missiles and can already threaten Australia's trade routes, subsea cables, and critical infrastructure. I want you to just put subsea cables into the back of your mind now for our second topic. The foreign policy think tank, the Lowry Institute, has tackled the dramatic scale of Beijing's vast military build-up, which calls a historic shift with sharp consequences for Australia's security. We do need to emphasize that the analysis focuses on China's military capabilities and does not make any predictions about the likelihood of conflict or the prospect of Beijing using military force against Australia. But of course, for our own security and defense, we need to ensure that we are aware of our adversaries' capabilities. There's no point in having a defense force if we don't know what we're going to potentially be fighting against. The report says that China can already hit Australia with ballistic missiles launched from ships, submarines, and retains the ability to strike Northern Australia with its DF-26 missile system if fired from its artificially built islands in the South China Sea. It also points out that Beijing can already block Australia's trade routes through choke points of the Indonesian archipelago. They can also sever undersea cables, which Australian communications and commerce depend on, and conduct sophisticated cyber operations against Australia's critical infrastructure. But the authors warn that the threat to Australia could escalate dramatically if China seizes a military base in the Pacific or successfully develops a new long-range bomber or drone with the size and range to reach Australia. And we know that they've been pushing some of our Pacific neighbors to do just that. The report says that China may have developed a new missile with a range that can reach Australia and points to speculation by the Pentagon that Beijing has also built new intercontinental ballistic missiles armed with non-nuclear warheads. Now, some people are going to wonder about that. What's the point of building a new intercontinental ballistic missile if you already have nuclear-armed intercontinental ballistic missiles? Can't you just put a non-nuclear warhead on the top and fire that off? The answer is yes, you can. The problem is intercontinental ballistic missiles aren't typically particularly accurate because they generally carry a nuclear payload. And when you're hitting a city, it kind of doesn't matter if you're 200 meters off the mark. It's going to do what it's going to do. As a result, they're not particularly useful as a strategic weapon outside of a nuclear capability. As we've seen, Russia has used them in Ukraine and actually so has Iran against Israel as well.
So just to clarify that, Russia has used those missiles. They haven't used nuclear.
Yes, they've used intercontinental ballistic missiles with non-nuclear payloads attached. And they are very terrifying to watch the videos of them coming down because the speed that they move is just insane. But again, the accuracy really limits their strategic value in terms of actually hitting what you're aiming at. But of course, if you have better guidance systems and better ballistics, essentially, suddenly now you've got a devastating weapon, which is almost very difficult to defend against, that can actually hit what you're aiming at, which is where the Pentagon has become concerned. The federal government has been locked in what the foreign minister has called a permanent contest with China across the Pacific as it tries to stop Beijing establishing a military foothold in the region. And the Lowry Institute report offers a blunt assessment of the status quo, saying that China has actively sought basing arrangements in the Pacific Island nations since at least 2018, and that any such base could bring Central Australia within bomber range and allow attacks to be mounted more frequently. One of the report's co-authors, the Lowry Institute's Sam Rogovin, said the People's Liberation Army Navy's circumnavigation of Australia last year, which we covered at the time, showed how it was increasingly able to project power further afield and that it was clearly intent on building more aircraft carriers that would allow it to push further afield. He said specifically, quote, "They're learning to operate those carriers in an efficient manner and developing real military capabilities. And they're pushing for up to 9 carriers, which would make them far and away the second biggest carrier fleet in the world and close to the US." End quote. The Lowry report concluded by warning that China's growing military power also undermines Australia's security because of the states in the Southeast Asia facing growing pressure to accommodate Chinese preferences as the balance shifts, even where they resist doing so openly. The primary counterweight is the credibility of the US extended deterrence and the cohesion of a US-led security arrangement. both of which China's build-up is directly designed to erode. And unfortunately, as we've seen over the last few months, particularly with this administration, the US-led security arrangements is more on shaky ground than it has been in the past. The PLA is thus helping China to construct a sphere of influence in Southeast Asia that excludes Australia and its partners. In sum, these changes represent a historic shift that affects Australia's interests regardless of China's capacity to strike Australian territory directly. So, a lot going on in this topic. Ardeet, how do you sleep at night with Xi Jinping whispering into your ear about blowing you up?
Look, I suppose I feel like it's not necessarily anything imminent. We're not to the. We've got a lot of strong economic ties with China. There's a reasonable diplomatic relationship with there, so I don't sort of feel like we're even close up on the cause for alert scales. However, you do have to be forward-looking and realistic about your defence. And really, when it comes to China, we're talking a defensive position. We're certainly not talking, an aggressive position. So we're talking about the ability to defend Australia. And I think you have to be realistic about that. At the very least, you have to be able to game it out and make decisions, and it would just be head in the sand to say this couldn't happen. Same with other nations. I mean, you have to play out all the possibilities. What happens if something happens to the US and we can't rely on that alliance, or we can only rely on it 50%. These are all the things that people with military and strategic pay grades way in excess of what I've got need to consider. And China happens to be one of the big ones. Even someone at my level can understand that. So look, it doesn't bother me, but it's certainly not something that I dismiss. The missiles, you're obviously correct about what you were saying with the accuracy. I don't think that changes necessarily the potency of even sending an existing missile with a non-nuclear warhead to, even if it lands, close enough to a city, it's still going to have the intended effect, particularly if it's an expression of exerting power in some situations. So to me, that missile threat is probably already locked in. That it might become more accurate is sort of a step up on that, but it's not really the biggest thing for me. The ability to disrupt maritime trade, sever communications infrastructure, and do the cyber operations, that to me is the biggest threat. I'm not blasé about the direct kinetic threat, but those supply routes, ships, controlling areas, and essentially attempting to subjugate us and our neighbours, to me is probably the biggest threat. It's longer term. It hits widely. It does impact an entire population, and it's also very difficult to fight against. So that thing from the report that they're talking about those sides of it, they're the bits that probably bother me more. And I feel like China's been quite open about the asymmetric warfare, which we've mentioned several times here on the podcast. And part of that asymmetric warfare, where you're fighting on more than just the traditional grounds, includes things like the trade, the communications infrastructure, your cyber, your power grids, all that sort of stuff. That to me is where the real issue lies with it. Look, I think too, and I do give. Do like what Albo and Penny Wong are doing with the neighbours. We've mentioned that a couple of times about the building relationships and the value of that. It is a way to create sort of a stronger alliance of people within the people and nations within the sphere, the Pacific sphere, where China's, I suppose Pacific. The Pacific sphere. God, get tongue-tied on the too many P's and S's in there. Yeah, all the area where China can exert that influence down through Southeast Asia. If we've got a sort of a strong neighbourhood there, it essentially makes a bit of a bigger deterrent. It's not a safeguard, but it does make it harder. It's like one of those things. If you take these precautions, it's a bit harder for someone to do something about it. So I think there's a bit of a thumbs up for what they're doing there. And the constant diplomacy, I think, is going well. It's up there. We are keeping that economic ties and whatever that, I can't remember the expression, something about, where goods cross borders, armies don't. I think if we can keep working there, that's good. So I like the idea of constant diplomacy, but constant realistic vigilance. So yeah, it's a flag. It's a worthwhile study. Not going to keep me up at night, but I don't dismiss it. So what about you? What do you think about the study, the missiles in particular, and the other threats that were mentioned there?
I think we got to be a bit realistic. Like, this sort of research is written by a think tank that is paid to do this, right? So they're kind of, it's not what I'd call worst case scenario, but it is, painting the Chinese in an unfavorable light is probably a nice diplomatic way of putting it. Let's be honest, China's primary rival in the Pacific isn't Australia, it's the US. And a lot of this weaponry and defensive posturing is because of that. That said, it is concerning that we have such a powerful rival in the region, basically. And whether we like it or not, both militarily and economically, they're going to dominate, most likely, the next few decades, possibly centuries. And as a result, like you said, the diplomacy thing comes first. But I do think, though, there's a balance that India strike with diplomacy and carrying a big stick as well, so you don't get pushed around, which I think for our size, like, we do carry a big stick. This is where we've spoken about it before, and this is where I do kind of think that the nuclear weapons deterrent is going to become much more popular, let's say, with some of the middle power nations, countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, Germany, just as a handful. Because if the US is not going to, basically non-proliferation stopped, everyone agreed to non-proliferation of nuclear weapons because the US was like, we'll protect you all. And now that is, well, questionable, people are looking to alternatives. And unfortunately, if you're not directly in the US sphere of influence, countries like, I know Vietnam has very good relations to the US, kind of ironically given their history. But countries like the Philippines have obviously a complicated history with the US as well. And for a long time, they've been wanting to sort of step out of the US sphere of influence. But countries like Indonesia, even to a certain extent, like Papua New Guinea, these countries are going to be persuaded potentially by Chinese money and Chinese security, or as we've seen in the past, Chinese bullying, basically, to go, you know what? No, you can't trade with that people anymore. You can only trade with us. And we sort of laugh that those sorts of things wouldn't happen in this day and age. But the reality is we very much take that idea for granted, quite frankly. Like in the past, that was the status quo. That was normal. It's actually very unusual that we don't have agreements like that these days anymore. And so what we take for granted is kind of the exception, not the rule. So I think there is some concern around the potential that China could kind of dominate, particularly our neighborhood. And as a result, we could kind of be not cut off, but like excluded, let's say, from the rest of the neighborhood. Because you know we're on the US's team, not China's team. So I think that's concerning. I also think this is a little bit of a wake up call to the Australian government to take anti-missile technology maybe a little bit more seriously. I think it's probably worth investing in some of these missile defense systems, as we've spoken about before, and this report just kind of again lends credence into that. Obviously, AUKUS is going to be a little bit of a game changer, because if we have AUKUS submarines sitting in the South China Sea or maybe off the coast of Taiwan, we could do an early intercept of missiles and things like that. So, and this also really, like you said, really comes to the current government supporting and really pushing our direct neighbors to have these agreements, so that we are in the room when conversations are happening with China and about security arrangements and stuff like that. So how long those sorts of allegiances last, though, is a question that we don't know ultimately. You know, governments change, money greases palms, all of those sorts of things, you know, so like things can change at a moment's notice. And so we've got to be vigilant, you know, and you're foolish to think that nothing could happen, because it absolutely can, and it does. So
randomly open the page of any history book. Well, obviously not any page, but you look back in history and that's reality.
Yep. Yeah. One of my favorite books is it's called "The End Is Always Near" by Dan Carlin, who's a historian. Yeah. And it's a fantastic book because it really highlights how it always does feel like the end of the world is right around the corner. And he gives examples through a lot of history, and some certainly genuinely would have felt like that at the time. But of course, things didn't happen. And this does feel a little bit like, look, I think the best way to describe it is Cold War 2.0. You know, and I think we need to come to realize that we are kind of in another Cold War, but this one is quite different than the last one. You know, we're economically reliant on China, and as a result, you know, unlike the Soviet Union, things are quite a bit different, but the same but different, if you know what I mean. So I don't know. Interesting times ahead, that's for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah.
All right, let's move on. I think it's time for our Two Ticks Town Talk.
I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Across the desert, fair man. I've breathed the mountain air, man. I've traveled, I've had my...
All right, this week's Two Ticks Town Talk, we're going to southeastern Victoria, specifically to the Gippsland, to Korumburra. Korumburra it's only 120 k's southeast of Melbourne, in the South Gippsland. So if you're from Melbourne, if you're a Melburnian, nice and close. You could go there for the weekend, I guess. But small town with a 2021 census population of only 3,639. It is a nice, quiet little town surrounded by picturesque rolling green hills. It's quite pretty sort of area of the country. First established in 1889, the town's prosperity basically grew from, which ones are going to be, gold, coal, or something else. In this case, it was coal mining. And that lasted until 1962. Today, though, the town's sort of main industry is cattle, particularly dairy farming. It is a quiet little part of the world until the first half of last year, in 2025, when the neighbouring town was home to Aaron Patterson, a.k.a. the Mushroom Murderer. And that kind of blew up this area and put it onto not just a national spotlight, but an international spotlight as well. But that isn't what the Stu Ticks Town Talk is about. But I do feel like I needed to mention the elephant in the room. So, every year in the little town of Korumburra, in early September, a giant worm comes out and parades through the main street, or at least it did. It looks like some of the worm puppets may have been retired over the last few years, but the big one was called Karmai, the big worm, and the giant puppet essentially was paraded through the streets, a bit like one of those Chinese like dragon, a bit like that, but it was a worm, and that was paraded through the streets to celebrate the local community and the local Gippsland giant worms that are found in the surrounding area. That's right. This is another Two Ticks Town Talk where we look at what's in the ground around the town. And this time, though, for once, it's actually alive, and that is the giant Gippsland earthworm, the largest earthworm on planet Earth, which is pretty cool. They're basically exactly what you're probably thinking when I say giant worm.
Large and worm-like?
Yeah, a big noodle, essentially. They're huge, obviously. They typically reach lengths of 1 meter or 3 feet long. That's pretty average, and about 2 centimeters in diameter. So they are quite noodly still. But they have found specimens that are over 3 meters long, which is absolutely wild. They're that typical kind of earthworm, maroon, grey kind of color. You know, it's kind of fleshy, kind of colored, maybe a little bit of purple. That other species of what you would typically think of when you think of earthworm have. So they very much look like a normal worm, just bigger. But they do have a very dark, grey, kind of purpley head. So one end of them will look like it's all bruised and swollen. That's the head, they tell me. Other than the color and sort of the size variation, it just looks like a tube. Much like the more common earthworms, those sorts you probably got in your garden, their bodies can stretch and contract. And there are some pictures online where they've sort of fully contracted, and of course when they do that, they swell a little bit. This fills me greatly with pleasure because they become this chunky little I don't know, stick-looking thing. But of course, they can stretch out a really long way. So I want to play with one, basically. They live in the subsoil of blue, grey or red clay soils along stream banks and some south or west facing hills of their remaining habitat, which is in the Gippsland. Not specifically just around here. They're sort of spread out over about 100-kilometre, but they're 100-kilometre patch, but they are highly isolated into small groups. They live in deep burrow systems, and they do require water in their environment to breathe, essentially. So, like a lot of worms, they don't like it too dry. It's just got to be just right. They have a relatively long life expectancy for invertebrates and can take up to 5 years just to reach maturity, which is pretty impressive.
Wow, I wouldn't have even come close on that guess.
Yeah, they can live for decades.
Wow. Huh.
They lay quite large eggs, surprisingly. I can't ever think that I've ever specifically noticed like worm eggs or anything like that. But these naturally lay quite large eggs. They're about 4 to 7 centimeters long, so that's a couple of inches. So they're pretty bloody big. They lay these in their burrows underground where they incubate for up to 12 months before they hatch. The baby worms, when they do hatch, are about 20 centimeters long, but they can take another several years to reach adulthood and breeding age. So it's a very slow, I'm assuming tough life being a worm.
Nobody loves you, everybody hates you.
Unlike other more common earthworms, they actually spend most of their time at least half a meter under the ground, and they don't deposit their castings onto the surface like most other worms. Now, I already know what your next question is. What the hell is a casting? Castings are the sediment that is removed basically by burrowing. So as you dig a hole, you got to put the dirt somewhere. That is the castings. Normally, most worms and other burrowing creatures kind of throw them out the entrance of the hole. But these guys don't really come to the surface pretty much very often at all. And as a result, you won't really find an entrance to their burrows on the surface under typical circumstances. It's not impossible. They do come up in some circumstances. But really the only common way to actually get one to come to the surface is very, very heavy rain, where the water has completely waterlogged the sort of top meter of soil, which, as you can imagine, is a hell of a lot of rain and basically flooding conditions before they'll actually come up out of their burrows to the surface. They sometimes are known to do this if food or organic matter has become scarce in their area as well. They may come to the surface to basically have a feed. What do they eat? Little kids. No. They well, I mean, if you're buried, they might. They eat organic matter, just like other worms, as well as bacteria and fungi, which, because they're sort of a bit varied compared to some other worm species that may only eat specific types of organic matter, they do think this has allowed them to better adapt to the change from this area changed, of course, from forests to pastures, but they don't seem to be too impacted by that change, which is pretty cool. They're usually quite sluggish, as worms typically are, but they have been studied to move quite rapidly through their burrows, which causes an audible gurgling or sucking sound, which can be detected sometimes at the surface. So if you're sitting in a paddock in the southern Gippsland and suddenly you hear some gurgling underneath you, look, it might just be that you're hungry or you might need a fart, but it also could be a giant earthworm moving underneath you. Unfortunately, the Gippsland earthworm colonies are small and, as a result, quite isolated from other worm colonies, or maybe they're not. Maybe that's on purpose. Maybe there's a epic underground war going on. We don't know. But the species do have a low reproductive rate and a slow maturing timeline, which makes those small populations quite vulnerable. But it also should be said that there's no reliable data on which to base population estimates or trends, because obviously it is quite difficult to study subterranean species, particularly when they don't often come to the surface. So how many there are, we don't know. There could be one underneath you right now. The biggest threat to them, of course, is habitat destruction. Their natural habitats are grasslands and lightly forested areas, and while they can survive beneath pastures, cultivation and heavy cattle grazing and effluent runoff are adversarial to the species, basically. They, as all things, we don't want to overdo it. But I'd like to say, for once, small-scale responsible cattle farming might actually help save this species, because heavy tree planting will actually threaten them as well. They're worms, but they're very temperamental. They're a little bit of divas. A dense tree cover will actually reduce the soil humidity and dry out the ground, which they don't like, and as a result, won't live there. So, weirdly enough, actually removing quite a lot of vegetation may have actually helped them to continue to survive to this point, which is often not what we hear.
That's a twist.
Yeah. So a bit of a twist. So, which is kind of cool. But that's basically all I have for you on the Gippsland giant worm. There was a worm museum. It was shut down in 2012. Well, it was a wildlife museum that did have a whole section on the worms. It got shut down in 2012, unfortunately, and actually has made the news a couple of times because it was effectively abandoned, and there was a large shark that was in, I think it was like in chloroform or something like that. And it was just left in there. So a few urban explorers walked in there and got a bit of a fright seeing basically an abandoned giant, I think it was a great white or something like that, just sitting in a room by itself. So, unfortunately, there's not really much that I can say. Get out there, go see the Gippsland to see the worms. Go see the Gippsland because it's a beautiful country. It's a beautiful part of Australia. And, if you're from Europe or something like that, I think you'd find it very, very lovely and remind you of home. Just don't expect to see any of these giant worms. So, because, they don't want to see you. They want to stay underground. Don't be disappointed, though. Know that they're there. They're there where they want to be. They're under your feet, eating dirt, as they love to do. So hopefully one day you won't see a giant Gippsland worm, but you might get out to our Two Ticks Town Talk town this week of Korumburra, and you can go to the Worm Festival when it's held in early September instead.
Very good. I actually went to the museum you're talking about many years ago with Mrs. Ardeet. In fact, I'm trying to think it was even pre-2000. It probably was, actually. Something like that. Like I vaguely had in my head about it shutting down, but it was. They had.
I should say it's called Wildlife Wonder Park for anyone that wants to look it up.
Yeah. Well, hang on. Am I getting mixed up with a place called the Giant Earthworm? This was certainly its focus was on the. Its focus was on the giant earthworm, and they had displays and dioramas and things and recordings of how it actually sounded going through the earth, and some of them that were preserved. I can't remember if I don't think they had any live ones there. It was just sort of representations of them, and I was just sort of, because they can also be fairly fragile from memory. To catch and handle, so it wasn't as if they had a worm petting zoo.
Yeah. Worms are notoriously fragile, right? Yeah.
Especially when they get that big. But yeah, it was one of those drive around things. And what's this? This one were reasonably new to Victoria, and it was one of the adventures driving around. So it was, as you said, it is a nice part of the world. So I'm thinking that must be the same spot.
Yeah, and what I'll do as well as for anyone that is interested, I'll put the news article about this abandoned park. I don't want to call it a theme park because that's not quite right, but if they want to see what we're talking about. But yeah, look, I'm a bit disappointed that there's not something I can point to and go here and learn more. But look, maybe there's a visitors center along the highway or something like that. I'm sure there's a little bit of something. But in my cursory look, I couldn't specifically find something going, go there, come and have a look. So there is a coal museum in the town. But other than that, look, I think if you ask some locals, they might be able to point you in the right direction as well. They might go, oh yeah, old Kev up the road found one yesterday and you can go have a look at it or something like that.
Yeah. Nice country to drive around in anyway.
It's very, very pretty. Yeah.
Drive and walk, so yeah.
All right, let's move on. It's time for the world's biggest whale graveyard has been found in the Indian Ocean off Australia. That headline just by itself it's kind of strikes fear into people, I think. It is a little bit scary thinking about a whale graveyard under the ocean. But what I want you to do is I want you to imagine a whale swimming through the open ocean far from land, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest landmass. It swims near the surface. It's old. It's tired. It takes its final breath and very slowly begins to sink. It falls slowly into the deep, like Jack at the end of Titanic. It sinks into the dark. Obviously, this happens. Like, I don't think we really think about what happens to animals in the ocean when they get old or they're sick or injured. But of course, they die and they sink to the bottom eventually. This can actually take like a surprising amount of time. Ardeet, do you want to guess how long on average it takes a whale carcass to fall from the surface to the bottom of the ocean floor?
So, like, if it dies on the ocean surface, and then how long till it gets to the bottom of the ocean? 2 days.
See, this is what I would have thought, but I was shocked to find out that it generally... So what I should say as well, I've sort of painted a little bit of an incorrect picture here because even if a whale dies under the surface because of bacteria inside its body and gases and things like that, they swell and they'll float, and so they'll come back up to the surface. And that generally takes a few days, and that can attract seabirds and other marine life to come and essentially feed on the carcass. But then it will eventually start to sink. And this kind of depends on location, temperature, whale size, salinity, a whole heap of things, weather as well, about wave action and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But generally, a whale carcass can take at least a week, most of the time several weeks, or even can take months to finally come and rest on the bottom of the ocean floor, which is pretty wild.
Well, that's bizarre. I would have thought. Look, I can understand the. Like, I was sort of thinking, okay, well, you swell up, get the decomposing and gases and that, but I would have thought as soon as that essentially body bladder was. Pecked through or broken, that you would pretty much just sink straight away, but obviously not.
No, well, they do, but the process of actually getting to the bottom takes a lot longer than I think most people realize. They can hit thermoclines, which is like a change in temperature, or salinity barriers where they can essentially kind of float under the water for a certain period of time and then continue to sink and so on and so forth. So in the deep ocean, though, more than 1,000 meters down, the decomposing body of the marine mammal has a very specific name when it gets down there, and it's called a whale fall. And a whale fall in of itself actually supports an entire ecosystem. It's quite a fascinating, whilst grim and a bit macabre situation. So whale falls are basically like winning the jackpot for deep sea scavenger species, and it provides them with an important and long-lasting food source for this ecosystem where, as you can imagine, food is pretty hard to come by. So when a Chinese-led research expedition discovered a graveyard comprising 5 of these whale falls, along with hundreds of cetacean fossils from past falls, they knew that this was globally significant. On the one hand, that's because of the site's paleontological record, which included the skull of previously unknown extinct beaked whale species, and some of the fossils found on the seafloor this is in the Diamantina zone, about 1,200 kilometre long area of underwater ridges and trenches off the Indian Ocean off the coast of Perth. Some of these fossils were 5.3 million years old, which is incredible. On the other hand, though, the discovery, which was published in the journal Nature, is a biological wonder with specialized communities of invertebrates and other marine creatures, many of which are new to science, living on and devouring the remains of these whales. And together, these traits make up the deepest and largest collection of whale fossils and falls found to date in the ocean. The whale graveyard was found during an expedition by the Chinese research vessel Tan So Yi Hao in March 2023. The RV Tan So Yi Hao is often used for the Global Trench Exploration and Diving Program, a collaborative endeavor between China's Institute of Deep Sea Science and Engineering and several other countries, one of which is New Zealand, because New Zealand has a lot of deep sea trenches that they want investigating. The Institute of Deep Sea Science and Engineering's Deputy Director Xingtong Pen said that the program aimed to investigate the biodiversity, ecosystem pollution, and geological processes in the deep parts of the ocean. One of the fossils belonged to a baleen whale, but 5 other fossil species were extinct beaked whales. 3 of the active whale falls belong to this same species of modern beaked whales. And I should explain here as well that whale fall go through 3 distinct stages of decomposition. You have the initial scavengers like hagfish and sleeper sharks that pull off what remains of soft tissues and blubbers and you can imagine there's not a huge amount of that by the time it gets down here, but these creatures are absolutely massive. So for the hagfish and things, it's a lot, and this can last several months on some of the bigger animals. The second stage involves animals inhabiting the whale's bones and nearby sediments. The decomposing body has enriched with organic compounds. And this stage lasts several months or up to 5 years in some cases. And the third and final stage, bacteria decompose fatty composites within the bones themselves, releasing hydrogen sulfide that feeds deep sea shellfish like mussels, clams, and snails. And this final stage of whale decomposition occurs when only minerals are basically left from the bones, which provide a solid surface for suspension and filter feeders to settle on. Think like barnacles on a rock. And this stage can last decades or until there basically is no available space left on the bones because they're completely covered in animals. So whilst you'd expect to see whale falls from only the last few years to possibly a decade or so ago, the discovery of extinct whales and the abundance of them was completely unexpected. Over 33 dives, they found 476 fossils of cetaceans, including new species. And at least one of the fossils was over that 5 million years old, which is incredible. And look, I can already hear you say, DK, if it takes a decade to decompose, how is it that there are remains that are thousands or even millions of years old? That is a great question. There are several hypothesized reasons, basically, for how the whale graveyard like this has formed, and also like why this spot and how have they been preserved so well and intact. And basically, the Diamantina zone where this has been found seems to serve as either a habitat for or like a migratory corridor for several whale species. And this means that probably a lot of the remains could have come from whales that died naturally. At this point in time, we don't really know the cause of death for most of these whales because, we're talking about ancient remains that have been in the water a very, very long time. And as you can appreciate, we're not getting CSI down there to figure things out. Dr. Song from the Institute of Deep Sea Science and Engineering said that the high concentration of beaked whale species among the fossils could also be behavior related. They said, quote, deep sea diving beaked whales exceed 3,000 meters, and that may reach psychological limits, increasing the risk of fatality or, fatal exhaustion or decompression sickness, end quote. So basically, it could be that these whales are hold your breath for the longest. I can go deeper than you, and maybe some.
So basically, it's a trench full of show-offs.
Yeah, pretty much. Potentially.
So most of them would be males.
Yeah, you think so, right? It's also it is a trench. So there's a V-shaped topography of this area, which also probably helps funnel like carcasses kind of into a specific area as well. Which makes sense. But the preservation of the fossils for so long can come down to a combination of factors. A few hypothesized reasons is that the fossils were mostly beaked whale noses, which are hyper-dense and mineral-rich, making them more resistant to degradation and decomposition over time compared to other parts of the carcass or other species carcasses. The sedimentation rate here is also extremely low, and over time, ferromanganese oxides, so metallic oxides in the water, basically coat a protective film, like a crust on the bones, and this can actually slow or even completely stop the process of these creatures actually being able to break them down. So they kind of get fossilized in place. And of course, the deep sea environment is extremely cold and stable. So there's not, as you can imagine, there's not really any physical or chemical weathering going on down here as well. It's basically a non-existent issue. It don't rain on the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
University of Hawaii whale fall expert Craig Smith, who was not involved in the study, though, he said the graveyard was a significant find. He said that it indicated that whale falls could promote biodiversity in some of the ocean's deepest parts. But he said specifically, quote, clearly, many new species remain to be discovered on whale falls in other parts of the ocean. The results support the idea that deep sea whale falls are biodiversity hotspots and provides stepping stones for sulfide-dependent taxa. This work suggests we should look for similar whale necropolises. I can never say this word. Necropolises under feeding grounds for beaked whales, end quote. And I think that's kind of cool, actually, the idea that the bottom of the ocean can just be like concentrated whale graveyards, essentially, which also kind of, I don't know, it freaks me out a little bit. But anyway, Ardeet, what do you think about this? Because this is really interesting, cutting edge science being done in our backyard.
Yeah. Oh, look, well, hearing about everything it feeds and the microbes and that, my takeaway is we should be increasing our hunting of whales to help these seafloor organisms.
You just got to challenge them. Go, nah, I could dive deeper than you, bro.
Yeah, that's right. I like it. I like when we dive into some of these science topics. Just sort of hear about them. I mean, there's no sort of controversial take or anything about it, but it's interesting to hear just how it sort of creates their own little environment. I mean, yeah, whale. It's an obvious thing to say, but whales are big creatures. So once it gets explained, you can think, oh yeah, I can understand that. It still sort of puzzles me. I was glad you told me that theory about the how they could have come there, and the trench being a V. That sort of satisfied me a bit, because my initial impressions were sort of like, well, how on earth does this happen? So that was interesting to hear on that side, and I enjoy that there's this. We cover you look at our first topic with the defence and the missiles and that, but that it contrasts so nicely with here's in this case was a Chinese research vessel doing pure science, looking for discovery, because I think it's one of those things that people forget just how massive and unexplored the ocean is. It's sort of, it gets taken for granted. It's not always the most exciting thing for people. It's generally not something that you can travel to. Most people, including me, don't go that far offshore. But once you move away from the coastlines with which we're all familiar, and which is tends to fill a lot of people's perception of the ocean, it's like, oh, there's the coastline with the waves, and then there's these seas, and then you get to another coastline with the waves. That in between bit, it's just a whole another world. It's no wonder the aliens are hiding down there. And to hear something like this, which is a genuine discovery, I think that's really exciting. I mean, obviously the people involved in this and the whalefall experts and that are more excited about it than I am. But I can appreciate something like this being such a significant find. And then that you've got these fossils being formed down there from millions of years ago, and the information you get from that. I think it's really a really interesting discovery, and that it's, I mean, we've been sailing the seas for there, but there's obviously been this step forward in technology and capability, and I don't know how many decades it's been over what it is, but that allows this exploration of the sea deeps that pulls this up, and it just always sparks my imagination of, well, what's around the next corner, or what's around the next trench. And the thing that I was really surprised about in this was just what an ecosystem it creates, and that there's something sort of I don't know, without getting too, waxing too lyrical, but there is something sort of, noble and generous that this, great beast eventually makes its way down to the ocean floor and feeds an entire ecosystem for weeks, and it changes, and then it becomes a different one, and ends up being something that provides a structure for decades. There's something, I don't know, there's something sort of satisfying and majestic about that. So yeah, I like hearing this sort of stuff, and it's a nice contrast to other things going on in the world and the joy of science. What about you? What do you think about it, and the what's been revealed, and the exploration of the ocean?
So I guess there's a couple of things, and I want to start by saying I very much share your opinion on there's something sort of like beautifully poetic about such a majestic and huge creature, such a dominating creature in the surface, when at the end of their life they kind of give up all of that nutrients to this very alien sort of world on the bottom of the ocean that does feel like every time we go down there, we just discover new stuff, which is like incredible. One thing that I want to touch on first, that I sort of alluded to at the very beginning of the podcast, is that this research vessel has done some incredible work in this space. But I can't help but think about a Chinese deep sea research vessel in the area off the coast of Australia. They kind of just, a couple of red flags go up for me. And I'm not saying that they're doing anything nefarious, but they could be looking for undersea cable vulnerabilities, or they could they could be placing down acoustic, basically deep sea microphones to track submarines, as an example, and things like that. Now, I'm not saying that's what they're doing. I'm just saying it's sort of, when I hear about Chinese research vessels exploring the sea floor, my first thought goes to, yeah, but why? That's
why you said to me and the listeners, keep in mind subsea cables when we get to this story.
Yes,
right.
So that's kind of that. So I'll address that up front. So, that is definitely in the back of my mind. Is that specifically relevant to this vessel at this time for this study? I don't know. And it is just completely speculation. So, but look, the deep sea is international waters. We can't stop them from doing this sort of research or even exploring and those sorts of things. Broadly speaking, though, taking this at face value, I think it's fantastic. They did, 33 dives, and through that process, they found 476 fossils, including new species, which is incredible, quite frankly.
Yeah.
They friggin' hit the jackpot, quite frankly, because they've probably been out there many, many, many times and just not seen anything, because there really is a whole lot of nothing across the bottom of the ocean. So you get to a point in the ocean which they call the abyssal plain, which is just the perfect friggin' name for it, because it's just a whole lot of nothing down there. It's completely pitch black in every way. This is where you'd find a lot of these deep sea horrors that you hear about, but they are very much are few and far between. Like in a square kilometer, you may only have a handful of living creatures. Like very, very, very sparse until you get to these geographic locations like trenches or seamounts, and of course, in this case, whale falls. And I do wonder if we'll find more concentrated deposits of these as the scientists are suspecting we may. This just may be the first of many that they discover now that we kind of know what potentially to look for. And we may find a whole heap more whale species that are now extinct and so on and so forth, which, again, I think is quite cool. I think it really shows us how much we have to learn about our planet, and especially, like, basically under our oceans. Like you said, I think most people don't really think about it too much. They just go like, well, I got on a plane and I flew for this long and then I got out and, but of course the oceans are unfathomably huge. It's like, what is it? Two-thirds of our world is ocean, and we don't really think about it. And when we do, we only really think about the surface, or maybe just under the surface, going snorkeling on a coral reef or something like that. This deep, deep ocean is, for a lot of people, it's very scary too. And it's very, very difficult to get to. It's very costly to do as well. So, like, I can understand why we're only now just discovering this stuff. Like, the barrier to entry to get there is very, very difficult. And so you need to have cutting edge technology, cutting edge teams. You're out in remote parts of the ocean for potentially weeks or months. So you've really got to know what you're doing,
Well, you've made that comment before when we've been talking about submarines, how essentially a submarine is like a spaceship.
Yep. Yeah, it pretty much is. Actually, in some ways, I would say it's more complicated than a spaceship because they have to provide a strong hull in a way that a spaceship generally doesn't have to. So in a spaceship, you're protecting the atmosphere inside from escaping, whereas, of course, in a submarine, it's the opposite. The water, the atmosphere outside wants to kill you. So in some ways, I do think like modern complex, probably the most complex submarines we have are military submarines, for better or worse. And I do think they're in some ways actually the most complicated machines we've ever built. And so it is complicated. It is difficult. And of course, we've barely mapped very much of the ocean. If you are interested on what we've mapped and what we haven't, it's very readily available on Google Maps. If you go to Google Maps, go to the oceans, what you're seeing isn't obviously the surface of the ocean. It's the topography data of the ocean. So you're basically looking at the ocean floor, which I think was a smart move by Google, actually, because otherwise it would have been quite boring, just looking at waves. And you can see some areas sort of like high fidelity and other areas are just kind of blurry. And those high fidelity strips often is where ships have sailed with the towed array of sonar, and they upload that data for free. And actually you can see, I know this is a bit grim, but you can see where a lot of the vessels were searching for Malaysian flight MH17 that went missing off the coast of... 17
or 370?
Oh, 370, that's the one.
Yeah.
Yep. I think 17 was the one the Russians shot down.
Oh, right. Yeah.
MH370, that's the one. You can actually see where they were looking for it on Google Maps because you can follow the tracks sort of southeast of off the coast of WA. So, but yeah, once you start looking at those tracks, you realize how much of the ocean we just haven't explored at all. Like, it's just so vast. It's insanely vast. And the reality is there's probably not a huge amount of anything out there. So, which is why we're not spending a lot of effort and time to get out there and explore it, which means for the few people that are doing the exploring, they're going to keep making discoveries, which is pretty exciting. Like if you've got a young person in your life that's like, oh, I wish I missed the age of discovery and I wish that I could have been an explorer or something like that, become a marine biologist and get on submersibles and get down there. You will, I guarantee you'll discover something new.
Yeah.
Every time they seem to dive, they come up and go, we found a new weird fish. Or something. Or horrors
I'm going
of
to
the
call
deep.
it weedy.
Yeah.
You always call it weedy. Yeah, but this one's really weird.
Weedy 3.
Yeah, weedy 3.
We'll call this one Weedy 4. And that's actually the cool thing. If you do discover a new species, you get to name it. That's how that works. So, get out there. If you're inspired, get out there. Get exploring. I think this is just, it's pretty cool. Like, we don't get a lot of really cool stories like this, cutting edge research being done that is just kind of weird and interesting. So unfortunately, and I don't mean this disrespect to any researcher or scientist or anything like that, but a lot of the exciting stuff has been discovered. You're not going to discover a new species of lion or something like that. It'll be a bacteria or a bug or something like that. Again, no disrespect. I'm all for it, but there's a lot more exciting stuff that we can discover on the bottom of the horrors of the deep. And this is, part of that story. And I think that's pretty cool. So if you are interested, of course, there's way more. There's lots of photos and things like that. All of that is in the show notes. So go and have a look. And there are also, if you didn't know, there are some YouTube videos and live streams of some of this research that happens in real time. So you can actually join the scientists on the dives when they're doing it. And I'll put a link in the show notes for a couple of those YouTube channels. So if you are interested, you can actually watch the camera feed from the submersible while it's happening on the bottom. I watched a few of them. They go for hours and hours and hours, and a lot of the time there's nothing too exciting that happens until something very exciting happens, because you see something. Something will come out of the gloom towards the submersible, and you're like, whoa, what the hell is that? They have a whole crew of marine biologists that are sort of talking you through what you're seeing and stuff like that. So that's quite cool, and I'll put that in the show notes if you are interested to check out. But otherwise, let's move on. It is now time for This Week in Australian History.
Right, this week in Australian history, we're covering the 12th to the 18th of April. June 12th, 1789, the Hawkesbury River is discovered, always in question marks, so discovered by Governor Arthur Phillip. 1883, the first Australasian headquarters of the Salvation Army opened in Melbourne. 1886, William Spence chaired a meeting of shearers in Ballarat, Victoria, in which the unanimous decision was to form the Amalgamated Shearers Union, which later became part of the AWU, the Australian Workers Union. Got a long history on a number of those unions. 1902, the Commonwealth Franchise Act granted most Australian women the right to vote and stand in federal elections. So it's good, only 1 year after Federation. 1956, a free mass vaccination program with Salk, S-A-L-K, polio vaccine commences, and that was a major public health initiative that significantly reduced the number of polio cases in Australia. In fact, I even remember ads for the Salk vaccine. I think it was Muhammad Ali, and something like that. He's there and sing something, and the man with the plan is Jonas Salk. I think it was Jonas Salk. I might even have that wrong.
Yep,
in my head,
it is Jonas Salk. Yep,
it is Jonas. Yeah. Not that because I wasn't born in 1956, but it was sort of in my head from the early 70s. 1996, two Australian Army UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters collide near Townsville, killing 18 soldiers. So one of the worst peacetime disasters in Australian military history, and unsurprisingly, led to significant reviews of training and safety procedures. June 13th in 1933, the Australian Antarctic Territory is established, and Australia formally claimed a large part of it. And actually, I don't even...
The biggest part too.
Yeah. I suppose we're close enough to say, well, yeah, it's in our backyard, it should be ours. But, yeah, I'm not quite sure how that process went. I suppose it was, well, here we are, we can see there.
I think it was transferred, the United Kingdom's claim was transferred to Australia. I think that's how it sort of worked.
Oh,
but
okay.
It's not like sovereign territory, so the claims are kind of like, like one of the Chinese bases. Actually, I think maybe two of them are inside the Australian claimed territory, but again, it's a bit shaky.
Yeah, it's a little bit more sort of skewed towards science first down there, isn't it?
Very much so.
Let's not get too dicky about things. June 14th in 1825, Van Diemen's Land is separated administratively from New South Wales and becomes fully independent in December, as Tasmania, as it's known now. 1851, gold was discovered at the Turon River in New South Wales, and those diggings became the richest in New South Wales. I'll ask you this before I tell you the answer. What year do you reckon trains linked Sydney and Melbourne?
Ooh, I'm guessing it's pre-Federation. So what's that, 1901?
Yeah.
So, it can't have been. It has to be in like the last 25 years, I reckon, of the 1800s, surely. So I'll split the difference and say 1890.
Oh, close enough. 1883. Well, yeah, well done.
Obviously, they prioritised that. Like, let's get it. Well, which makes sense, right?
Yeah. But yeah, that was probably a little bit earlier than what I thought. But I suppose thinking about it, yeah. Oh, good guess. 1893, gold was discovered at Kalgoorlie in West Australia by Paddy Hennon and two others. And
they weren't as important as Paddy Hannon because they are not.
Yeah. That's it, Paddy Hannon and two other ones.
Yeah, a couple of guys,
Yeah, and there's been 1 or 2 ounces won from the area since then. 1943, 40 American service personnel are killed in Australia's deadliest aviation disaster at Bakers Creek in Queensland when a US military plane crashed near Mackay. 1868, pacifist Simon Townsend, later a TV entertainment, was granted exemption from national service after being detained at Ingleburn Army Camp on bread and water rations. So he was probably a bit before your time, Simon Townsend's Simon Townsend's Wonderworld. But yeah, it was interesting there that he was on the bread and water rations.
Yeah, no, I know who he is. I didn't realise he was a pacifist and he didn't want to... Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. June 15th in 1862, Frank Gardner, Ben Hall and Johnny Gilbert bailed up the Lachlan Gold Escort in Eugowra Rocks near Forbes, New South Wales, and it's still considered to be one of the largest ever gold robberies in Australia's history. If you want a few more details about it, we covered it in a Two Ticks Town Talk on Eugowra, 20th of June 2024, and I'll leave a link in the show notes. 1924, the Lawn Power Station began operating, and that was a brown coal-fired station in Victoria, and major supplier of electricity down here for decades. June 16th in 1906, the town of Roma, Queensland, becomes the first town in Australia to be lit and powered by natural gas. The reserves only lasted 10 days, but yeah. Well,
wouldn't you be annoyed? You'd be like, bloody lights have gone out. That's it. We're all done. Pack it up.
Yeah. So, yeah, but look, there was, you got to start somewhere. So they did it. 1950, butter rationing ends. So it's the end of wartime butter rationing. June 17th, 1867, birth date of Henry Lawson. So don't often do the birth dates, but he's one of Australia's best known poets and short story writers. So he had that real capturing the spirit of the bush and working class life. And then in 1893, the aforementioned Paddy Hennon and whoever the two other blokes were, they formally filed their reward claim about the discovery of gold at Kalgoorlie in Western Australia, and it just went gangbusters after that. If you don't know about Kalgoorlie, have a quick look up the big pit. And there, it's just, and it's still an amazingly rich area around there. It's everything came together geologically, and it really, a lot of gold from there. Finally, June 18th, 1829, official proclamation of the Swan River Colony, which was later called Western Australia. It was formally established, marking the beginning of free settlement in the West. So by 1932, it was renamed to the Colony of Western Australia, but the old name remained in informal use for a number of years, given being that way for almost 100. And as sure as a black swan's wing is white, I'm confident there was some rum and ale raised at the official proclamation.
I reckon there probably was.
All right, this week we go back into space with the second and final 4X bottle top quiz on the Australian space industry. And there's in no particular order because I thought, he'll suss that one out. Oh, no, he might know that one. Oh, he probably won't know. So, yeah, it doesn't go from easier to hardest or anything. It'll be a mixed bag, but we'll see how you go. This first one, who was the first Australian-born person to fly in space, and on which NASA mission did it happen?
I don't know. I got no idea.
I think this one's a bit hard unless you know it.
Yeah. This is one of these ones where it's like you either know it or you don't, right? And unfortunately, right. I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. I thought it might be one of those ones you pull it out. So it was a bloke called Dr. Paul Scully Power, who had become a US citizen by that stage. And he was, strangely enough, an oceanographer. Well, not strangely enough, but coincidentally enough.
Well, that is a bit weird, an oceanographer going to space. I don't know if you know this, but there are, as far as we know, there aren't any oceans in space. So I feel like his talents might have been wasted up there.
Yeah, they came to that horrible realisation once they sent the space shuttle up. And that was in 1984 that he was up there. But no, what he was, he made visual oceanographic observations of 3/4 of the world's oceans. And so he looked at current features that you couldn't detect from like remote sensing satellites in higher orbits, and apparently made some important discoveries about spiral eddies, which are large-scale circular ocean currents. So apparently it was worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah. Question 2, and I reckon you'll get this one because it's sort of tied in with one from last week, and which took you in a direction you didn't expect. So, Australia has hosted numerous NASA tracking stations over the decades. Which one near Canberra played a critical early role in receiving the first TV pictures from the Apollo 11 lunar module?
Oh, I think that's the what do they call it? The Deep Space Communications Network or something like that. It's part of the network in Canberra. I don't know what it's actually called, but I think last time it's something like it's part of the Deep Space Network. I know that.
It was, and it was called the Honeysuckle Creek Tracking Station. So yeah, and you had said that correctly, and I had to go back to the question from last week when I saw this one. It got the 8.5 minutes of the first one as they broadcast around the world, and then it was it swapped over to the Parkes telescope, which did the following 2 hours and 12 minutes of live broadcasts. So yeah, the way the other question was phrased, something along the lines of, like most of the broadcast or anything. So I thought, yeah, you'll probably
you got me on a technicality. Hey?
It was a technicality, so yeah, it wasn't a deliberate. It wasn't a deliberate technicality trap. So that's why I was sort of revealing what was different with it.
Yeah,
so.
You had a guilty conscience. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's right. It's been eating me up all fortnight. Yeah, no, not at all. And final one. With a bonus, what year was the first launch attempt on Australian soil of a fully Australian-built orbital rocket?
Oh, I'm trying to think when we built that satellite. That was in the 60s, wasn't it? But was that on an Australian rocket? I don't know.
Yes, very, very deliberately emphasising those qualifiers. First launch attempt on Australian soil of a fully Australian-built orbital rocket.
Okay, so
and it was a launch attempt.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh dear. Okay, so it obviously didn't make it. So that was the 60s, I'm sure. So it must have been after that. I'm trying to think of if in my in the last couple of decades we had.
I will give you a hint. It was after the 60s.
Okay, so because we've there's been a renewed interest, obviously, in space over the last couple of decades. So I do wonder if it's actually kind of recent, but I don't know. I'm gonna guess 1995. I'm just plucking a number out of my bum, basically.
You are thinking along the right way of fairly recent. So you're definitely thinking the right way. Have one more guess and I'll tell you.
Oh, is it more recent than that? So,
oh yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. So 2010?
Last year.
Oh, whoa!
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah, exactly. July 2025. Now, bonus.
Wow.
Bonus question. Do you know the name of the company?
No. I think I'm sure I heard about this.
Oh, yeah. We might have
covered this.
We did. Oh, yeah. That was last year. God, you'd be doing well if you remembered. I'd have no hope.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. They were up north, I think.
Yep.
They might have been. Were they named after the place they were launching from?
No, they launched from the. They did the launch from Bowen Orbital Spaceport in North Queensland.
But they're not called Bowen Orbital.
No, they're not.
Okay. No, don't know what it is then.
Yeah, I'll give you a hint. It starts with G and ends in Ilmore.
Gilmore Space. Now you say that, yes,
Yeah.
we did talk about this.
Yeah,
Yes.
we did. So it wasn't. It was actually that they launched. They got up into 14 seconds of flight, which was getting off the pad and into flight was actually a big step forward for a new rocket program. So that's. Whilst it's one of those things that people think, it went up, only was up there for a few seconds and fell down and blew up. It was actually a big step forward. So
That's half the battle is just getting off the pad.
Exactly. So it was significant. That was the Gilmore Space Technologies last year.
Wow. I guess I'm kind of surprised, but I'm not surprised that the testing back in the day was obviously not Australian technology. Like we were leveraging our partnerships with the US and UK, and all the testing that was done. I'm assuming that was out in Woomera or something like that, because that was purpose built for that, basically. But yeah, that's exciting though that we're lighting stuff on fire and seeing what happens. We're doing science, that's cool.
Yep, bloody oath.
Oh, well, there you go. I don't know nearly as much about the Australian space industry as I would like to, so might have to buy a book or something and brush up my knowledge. But they were good questions. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us for another Australia Talks. If you have any feedback or suggestions for topics, please get in touch with us on our email at australiatalks@proton.me. We'd also be grateful if you could subscribe and give us an honest review, as this helps us out immensely. But as I said earlier, the best thing you can do to support the show is to share it with the friends that you think might enjoy it as well. Otherwise, join us next week for another episode of Australia Talks. As always, thanks for listening, and don't forget to tell your mum I love her.
Thanks, DK. Remember, if you want to catch a whale, you have to use a big hook and a giant Gippsland earthworm.